Today, I want to talk to you about a profound shift, not just a mental change or a subtle adjustment, but a sudden transformation that many of us can feel approaching. A shift that doesn't begin in the outside world, but deep within our nervous system, our spirit, and even the architecture of our brain. Now, biologically speaking, our brains are wired to resist change. They prefer predictability. But spiritually, there are moments when that resistance is exactly what needs to be overcome, not by force, but by divine timing. You may be in a place right now where everything feels slow, stuck, maybe even silent. But neuroscience shows us that right before a breakthrough, the brain enters what's called a transitional mode: increased neuroplasticity, higher emotional sensitivity, deeper attention. Spiritually, that same space, that silence, is often the exact place where God begins to prepare something radical, something sudden, a reorganization of your purpose, your relationships, even your pain. Not chaos, but recalibration. Not destruction, but divine design. So if you've been sensing tension, resistance, or delay, I want you to lean in, because that may not be a sign of failure. It may be the signal that God is preparing a sudden shift in your life, and this moment is the beginning of it. Silence is something most of us are uncomfortable with. In a world that constantly bombards us with noise, notifications, and updates, silence can feel unnerving. But silence, in the spiritual sense, is not the absence of movement or purpose. It is a sacred space where preparation begins. When God is preparing a sudden shift in your life, one of the first signs is silence. Not because He has forgotten you or abandoned your prayers, but because He is working in depths that are beyond your immediate understanding. Silence is not divine neglect. It's often divine attention at its most focused and intimate level. When everything seems quiet, when your prayers feel like they're bouncing off the ceiling, when your life appears to be on pause, that's when God is usually doing His deepest work. The silence is where your character is shaped, your roots are deepened, and your soul is refined. Think about the life of Moses. Before leading Israel out of Egypt, he spent 40 years in the wilderness, not speaking, not leading, just walking in silence. That wasn't wasted time. That was preparation. God wasn't absent. He was aligning Moses' spirit with his purpose. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of unseen strategy and sacred shaping. In silence, distractions are stripped away. What remains is raw, honest dependence on God. This is where faith becomes less about results and more about trust. When there is no obvious outcome, when progress cannot be tracked, that's when real spiritual growth occurs. You start to lean into His voice even when you can't hear it clearly. You begin to learn that trust doesn't always feel like clarity. Sometimes it feels like surrender. Silence teaches you to stop relying on signs and to start relying on the one who sends them. God's preparation often feels invisible. Like a seed buried in the soil, transformation starts in the dark. No one sees the roots growing downward before the plant ever breaks through the surface, but those roots are essential. If you try to rush that process, if you try to make the seed grow faster, you risk weakening the entire structure. The silence is where the roots of your next season are taking hold. The deeper the silence, the deeper the root system. The deeper the root system, the greater the capacity for fruit in the next season. So if you're in a quiet season right now, it may not be punishment, it might be proof that something powerful is taking root. It's easy to equate movement with progress, but some of the most transformative moments in life come when everything appears still. Stillness invites reflection. It creates the space for clarity. And most importantly, it allows God to recalibrate your heart without interference. The silence isn't about punishment, it's about precision. He's aligning things in your life, removing the clutter, adjusting your posture, so when the sudden shift comes, you're not caught off guard, you're already in position. The silence before a shift is sacred. It invites you to look inward instead of outward. It challenges your motives, confronts your doubts, and exposes your fears. In that space, God begins to purify your intentions. You may have entered the silence wanting answers, but God uses it to give you alignment. You may have prayed for a door to open, but in the silence, He's preparing you to walk through it with wisdom, maturity, and humility. The shift isn't just about the outcome, it's about who you've become when you get there, and that becoming happens in the silence. Many of us think that preparation should look like action, that every step forward should be visible. But the truth is, some of the most important preparation happens when it looks like nothing is happening at all. God does His best work in the hidden spaces. He's setting things in motion behind the scenes, orchestrating connections you can't yet see, softening hearts you haven't yet met, preparing opportunities that haven't yet surfaced. And all the while, He's shaping you to be ready. The silence is not the end of your story. It's the ground floor of a shift you didn't see coming. If you're paying attention, you'll realize that silence is never wasted. It's the sacred evidence that something is on the way. Delays often feel like the most frustrating part of our journey. We live in a world conditioned for speed, where waiting is seen as weakness, and slowness is mistaken for failure. But in the spiritual realm, delay is not denial. It is a signal that God is working on something far deeper, far greater than what we can immediately perceive. A delay doesn't mean that your prayer wasn't heard or that your dream has been canceled. It simply means the foundation is still being laid. A shift is coming, but before that shift can occur, certain things must align in ways only God understands. When you experience a delay, the natural response is often discouragement. You question your faith, your decisions, even your worth. But what if the delay is the exact sign that something powerful is taking shape? Just because it's taking longer than you expected doesn't mean it's not going to happen. In fact, many of the greatest shifts in life are preceded by seasons that feel slow, uneventful, or even painfully still. But hidden in that delay is something sacred, a process that is forming you from the inside out. The delay is not about the destination. It's about the development required for you to carry the weight of what's coming next. God uses delays as divine checkpoints. They're not random moments of stillness, but strategic pauses to strengthen your faith, refine your character, and purge what cannot go with you into the next season. Every delay holds a lesson, and often, the longer the delay, the greater the assignment that follows. Look through Scripture, and you'll see this pattern everywhere. Joseph was given a dream in his youth, but he didn't walk in its fulfillment until years later, after betrayal, slavery, and prison. What seemed like a delay was actually preparation for promotion. The same God who gave the dream knew exactly when it needed to be fulfilled. Delays teach you patience, but more importantly, they teach you perspective. They force you to slow down and examine your heart. Why do you want what you're praying for? Are you seeking it for validation or for purpose? Are you willing to trust God's timing even when it conflicts with your own? The delay exposes whether your faith is rooted in outcomes or obedience. If God's answer takes longer than you hoped, will you still follow Him? That's the kind of maturity that is forged in delay. It's not glamorous, and it often goes unnoticed, but it's essential. Without it, the sudden shift could overwhelm you instead of elevate you. God often delays answers not to frustrate us, but to protect us. There are doors that look good on the outside, but lead to destruction on the inside. There are opportunities that appear right, but carry the wrong timing. If God allowed everything you wanted to happen when you wanted it, you'd miss out on his best. The delay is a divine filter. It separates what is immediate from what is eternal, what is easy from what is right. You may feel like you're ready, but God sees the full picture. He knows what's ahead, and so he delays not to harm you, but to position you perfectly for what he has prepared. The delay is also where dependency is built. When you're forced to wait, you begin to realize how little control you actually have. That realization is not meant to defeat you, but to deliver you. It frees you from the pressure of trying to force outcomes and brings you into a posture of surrender. When you stop trying to make things happen in your own strength, you make space for God to move in his. That's when you begin to see miracles not always in the way you expected, but always in the way you needed. The delay becomes a divine classroom, teaching you trust, humility, endurance, and ultimately, confidence not in yourself, but in the God who holds your life in his hands. And while the delay may feel like a valley, it's often the path to the mountain. Because when the shift does come, and you'll be able to handle it. You'll have the endurance, the perspective, the discipline, and the spiritual depth to carry it well. The delay wasn't punishment. It was preparation. It wasn't wasted time. It was divine timing doing its work beneath the surface. Every day of delay added a layer of strength, clarity, and resilience. The seeds planted in silence and watered through waiting are the very seeds that will burst forth when the shift begins. God shifts us internally before he shifts our circumstances. This truth is one of the most overlooked aspects of spiritual growth and divine preparation. When people pray for breakthroughs, for open doors, for new seasons, what they often expect is for things outside of them to change their job, their relationships, their finances, their environment. But in the wisdom of God, the process rarely starts on the outside. It begins in the inner world. The work of transformation is first spiritual, emotional, mental, and only then does it manifest in the physical realm. Before God rearranges your life, he reshapes your heart. Before he elevates your position, he strengthens your posture. Many people miss their shift because they're too focused on what they can see. They're looking for signs in the natural, unaware that God has already started moving in the supernatural. When God prepares to do something new in your life, he begins by adjusting how you think, what you believe, how you respond to adversity, and what you are willing to release. You may feel restlessness without knowing why, or find that certain habits no longer satisfy you, or that old mindsets begin to feel heavy and outdated. That's not random. That's divine disruption. God is stirring something within you that cannot be explained, but also cannot be ignored. An internal shift often comes with tension. Things that once felt comfortable start to feel confining. Places where you once belonged no longer feel right. Conversations you used to enjoy start to feel shallow. That discomfort is a sign. It means your spirit is growing beyond your current circumstances. God is preparing your identity for the weight of your next assignment. He is breaking down what no longer serves you, not to hurt you, but to create space for what he is about to release. And that internal shift can be messy. It can feel like confusion, like frustration, like emotional exhaustion. But behind all of that is a loving hand, pruning and refining, removing what's familiar to make room for what's fruitful. Before David ever stepped into kingship, he was shaped in solitude. Long before he held the crown, he developed courage in the fields, fighting lions and bears while tending sheep. God was not absent during those years. He was intentionally molding David's heart, building discipline, teaching him how to hear his voice in silence. That is the same way God works today. The battles you're facing now, they're not wasted. The emotional struggles, the mindset shifts, the spiritual wrestling, all of that is part of the internal restructuring required for the next level. You cannot carry a kingdom mindset if you're still trapped in a survival mentality. And so, the shift begins inside. This internal work is subtle but powerful. It changes how you interpret pain, how you wait through seasons of delay, how you steward what God has already given you. God won't place new weight on an unprepared structure. Just as a builder strengthens the foundation before raising the walls, God fortifies your soul before he shifts your situation. He teaches you how to forgive, not because it feels good, but because bitterness can't survive in the next season. He shows you how to walk by faith, not because you understand everything, but because clarity is not a prerequisite for obedience. He changes your desires, removes your idols, realigns your focus, and rewires your thinking. That's not random, that's foundational. Sometimes this internal shift means losing things comfort, relationships, routines, even parts of your identity that were never truly rooted in him. But what feels like loss is often grace in disguise. It's God emptying your hands so he can fill them with something better. He knows that if you enter a new season with an old mindset, you'll sabotage the very thing you were meant to steward. So he takes the time to cleanse your internal world to strengthen your faith, refine your motives, clarify your calling, because he's not just preparing a blessing for you. He's preparing you for the blessing. The internal shift is sacred. It's where intimacy with God deepens. It's where you start to discern his voice more clearly. It's where your identity becomes rooted not in performance or possessions, but in presence. God is not interested in temporary relief. He is committed to lasting transformation. That kind of change doesn't start with a changed address or a new job title. It starts with a renewed mind, a healed heart, a surrendered spirit. When God shifts you internally, everything around you begins to align with that change. The people, the timing, the opportunities, they all begin to reflect what's already taken place inside of you. The shift outside will always mirror the shift within. Discomfort is often the doorway to divine disruption. While most people avoid discomfort in the realm of faith, discomfort is often one of the first signs that God is moving. When God begins to prepare a shift in your life, he doesn't always start with blessings that feel good. He often starts with agitation that pushes you out of what is familiar. This is not because he wants you to suffer, but because he wants you to grow. Growth never happens in the comfort zone. It always begins with a disturbance, something that unsettles your routine, your emotions, your expectations, and your sense of control. That discomfort is not an accident, it's an announcement that change is near. We often associate disruption with chaos or pain, but when God disrupts something, it is always redemptive. It's a divine interruption meant to set you on a new path, a better path. Discomfort shakes us out of spiritual slumber. It breaks the illusion that we are in control and reminds us that something bigger is at work. It forces us to reevaluate what we've been holding on to and what we've been settling for. Many times, the discomfort comes not because we are doing something wrong, but because we've outgrown the season we're in. The pressure increases not to crush us, but to push us through to the next level. Look at the life of Abraham. God called him to leave everything familiar, his land, his people, his father's house, and walk into the unknown. That was not a gentle nudge. It was a complete disruption of everything comfortable. But that discomfort led to destiny. Had Abraham stayed in what was familiar, he would have never become the father of nations. The same principle applies today. When God disrupts your comfort, it's because he's preparing you for something your current situation cannot contain. The discomfort is a divine clue that you are not created to remain where you are. In discomfort, We often wrestle with questions that don't have easy answers. Why is this happening now? Why does everything feel uncertain? Why do the things that once satisfied now feel empty? But it is in those moments of questioning that we start to hear the whisper of God more clearly. Disruption strips away the noise. It removes the unnecessary. It reduces you to the essentials: your faith, your obedience, your trust in God's process. It doesn't always make sense in the moment, but there is always purpose beneath the pressure. Discomfort also reveals what you're really made of. It exposes what's unhealed, what's unresolved, and what's been buried under layers of busyness or distraction. That exposure is not to shame you, but to prepare you. God can only elevate what is anchored. If your foundation is not strong, the weight of the next level will become a burden instead of a blessing. The discomfort is God's way of testing the structure before the shift. It's where endurance is built, where discipline is developed, and where intimacy with God is strengthened. It's in the tension that spiritual muscles are formed. There are times when God will intentionally allow the things that once worked for you to stop working. The doors that once opened easily begin to close. The routines that once brought comfort now feel dry. The relationships that once brought joy now feel strained. These are not signs of regression, they are signs of redirection. When God is preparing a sudden shift, He often allows a holy dissatisfaction to rise within you. That dissatisfaction is not to make you bitter, but to make you bold. It's meant to stir your spirit until you are willing to walk away from the good in pursuit of the greater. Disruption isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle, a change in atmosphere, a restlessness in your soul, a lack of peace in areas where there once was calm. Pay attention to those signs. God often whispers through your discomfort long before He speaks through your circumstances. The discomfort is a spiritual indicator that transition is near. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. It's uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar, but unfamiliar doesn't mean unsafe. It means uncharted, and uncharted territory is where faith comes alive. You may be in a season right now where you feel like everything is shifting, but nothing makes sense. That is often the exact moment when God is closest. Not always in the way you expect, but always in the way you need. Discomfort is a tool in His hands. It may not feel good, but it is working for your good. It is stripping away what cannot stay so He can release what must come. The friction you feel is not your failure. It's your future taking shape. Discomfort is not the end. It's the evidence that a divine disruption has already begun. What looks like rejection may actually be redirection. In the moment, rejection can feel like the most painful form of disappointment. It shuts doors we prayed would open, removes people we thought would stay, and halts opportunities we believed were part of our purpose. But what if the no you received wasn't a punishment but protection? What if that closed door wasn't the end but the beginning of something better? God doesn't always explain His no's immediately, but He never wastes them. When God redirects, it often looks like rejection to the human eye, but it is part of a higher orchestration that only makes sense in hindsight. Rejection challenges our sense of worth. It causes us to question ourselves, our decisions, and even our calling. But sometimes the rejection is necessary to break our dependence on outcomes and realign our dependence on God. If we only felt accepted when things worked out, our identity would always be tied to performance. But when rejection comes and we still trust, still believe, and still move forward, that's where spiritual maturity begins to form. God uses rejection as a tool to refine our character and to redirect our steps toward the path He originally designed for us. There are things we wanted that God removed, not because He wanted us to suffer, but because He saw what we couldn't. He saw the weight that opportunity would bring. He saw the hidden intentions behind the yes we were praying for. He saw the future damage that relationship might cause, and in his mercy, he said no. Rejection hurts, but it also heals. It protects us from walking into places not meant for our growth. Sometimes God has to close a door we wouldn't close ourselves, just to ensure we don't miss what's really meant for us. In Scripture, we see this truth play out repeatedly. When the prophet Samuel was mourning Saul's rejection as king, God said to him, "How long will you mourn over Saul, since I have rejected him?" It wasn't that Saul's reign didn't serve a purpose, but the season had shifted and it was time for something new. Samuel had to let go of what once was in order to anoint what was next. In that moment, rejection wasn't the end of God's plan. It was the bridge to David, to legacy, to the future. The rejection of Saul was the redirection that led to the heart of God. Rejection often forces us into spaces we never would have chosen, but it's in those unfamiliar places where faith grows. You learn to stop asking why something didn't work out and start asking what God is trying to teach you. You start to see that sometimes the pain of being denied is far less than the pain you would have experienced had you been allowed to continue in the wrong direction. God's redirection doesn't always come with comfort, but it always comes with purpose. It's a rerouting, not a rejection of your destiny. It's Him steering you away from less than, so He can guide you toward more than. It can be difficult to accept redirection when all we can see is what we lost. But loss is often the soil in which clarity grows. In the absence of what we thought we needed, we begin to see what we truly desire. Rejection makes room for reflection. It creates space to evaluate if what we were chasing was even aligned with who we're becoming. Sometimes, the reason God shuts the door is because it was never about the door, it was about who we were becoming as we approached it. Rejection helps us shed identities built on performance, approval, or ambition, and calls us back to identity rooted in Christ alone. When we stop viewing rejection as failure and start seeing it as guidance, everything shifts. You no longer see yourself as a victim of closed doors, but as a student of divine direction. You begin to trust that if it didn't happen, it's because God has something else not just different, but better. Something that fits who you really are, not who you were trying to be to fit in. That kind of faith takes time to build. It requires honesty, grief, surrender, and a willingness to believe that God's no is still part of His yes to your future. Rejection tests your vision. Will you only move forward when it's easy, or will you trust the process even when it doesn't make sense? Will you believe that being denied something now could be the exact thing that protects you from disaster later? Will you trust that God sees the whole story, not just the chapter you're in? Every no, every disappointment, every exit is shaping your story. And if God allowed it to leave, it's because it wasn't meant to stay. Rejection may feel like an ending, but often it's the most necessary beginning. It's the divine moment where God says, "Not this way, but my way. Not this time, but in my time. Not this path, but the one that leads to what I've truly prepared for you." The sudden shift you're waiting for is already in motion behind the scenes. While it may not feel like anything is changing, and the outward signs still appear stagnant or repetitive, there are spiritual and divine movements taking place beyond your perception. What looks like stillness is often sacred activity in disguise. God is not confined by time the way we are. He operates in dimensions beyond our comprehension, orchestrating details, aligning people, and preparing moments that will intersect your life exactly when needed. The seeming delay is not evidence of inactivity, it is proof of preparation. God is always ahead of you, weaving together threads that will one day form the tapestry you step into. Just because your eyes haven't seen the shift yet doesn't mean the shift hasn't started. The manifestation may be sudden, but the process began long before you noticed. There are conversations happening you haven't heard, hearts being stirred that you haven't met, doors being fashioned that you haven't imagined. God works in the unseen. The silence is not because nothing is happening. It's because what's happening is too sacred to be revealed prematurely. We often think of breakthroughs as moments that appear out of nowhere, but in reality, they are the result of divine planning that has been unfolding all along. When something finally clicks, when a door opens, or when clarity arrives, it's easy to believe it happened suddenly. But God had been setting it in motion long before you were even aware of the need. What feels sudden to you is strategic to Him. The shift is not spontaneous chaos. It is divine choreography, each piece falling into place with precision and purpose. There are seasons when your life feels like a puzzle with missing pieces, and you wonder why certain things didn't work out, why certain people left, or why you had to walk through specific trials. But every piece is connected. Nothing is wasted. God is a master of timing, and when He prepares a shift, He ensures every element is in order. That includes your mindset, your character, your humility, your faith. If He gave you the shift too soon, it could crush you or confuse you. But when the shift happens at the appointed time, it lifts you and strengthens you. This is why trust is essential. Trust that God is working even when you feel forgotten. Trust that every day you've waited has not been in vain. Trust that your faithfulness in obscurity is seen. Your obedience in the mundane matters. The prayers you whispered in pain, the tears you cried in secret, the worship you offered when nothing made sense, all of it is being gathered and honored. The sudden shift is not about earning a reward. It's about God fulfilling a promise, and He never breaks a promise. Behind the scenes, God is also shifting you internally so that when the external change comes, you won't miss it or mishandle it. Sometimes we think we're ready for change, but God knows the exact moment when our soul can carry the weight of what we're asking for. He knows when your maturity has caught up with your vision. He knows when your heart is free enough to walk through new doors without dragging the old pain behind. The sudden shift is not just about circumstances changing. It's about you being able to step into those circumstances with wisdom, clarity, and authority. God's behind. The scene's movement is also about alignment. He aligns timing, relationships, resources, and revelations. When you step into a sudden shift, you'll often look back and realize how perfectly everything came together, how delays made sense, how rejections turned into redirections, and how what once felt like a detour was actually the exact road you needed to take. It didn't make sense while you were in it, but it will make sense when you look back from the other side. God is not random. Every step has been ordered, even the ones you question the most. This is why preparation matters so much. While you wait for the visible shift, prepare as if it's already on the way. Get your heart ready. Get your mind focused. Strengthen your spirit. Steward your current season with excellence, even if it feels small or hidden. Because when the shift comes, you won't have time to get ready. You'll need to already be ready. God doesn't send a shift to catch you off guard. He sends it when you've been shaped for it, even if you didn't feel like the shaping was working. The quiet seasons, the stretching seasons, the lonely seasons, they've all been part of the preparation for something greater. You don't need to force anything. What is meant for you will find you. The shift that God has ordained cannot be blocked, delayed, or canceled by anyone. It may not happen on your timeline, but it will happen right on schedule. All the movement you've been hoping for is already unfolding beyond your sight. The breakthrough, the open door, the answered prayer, it's not coming from nowhere. It's coming from the throne of grace, where every detail has already been designed with your purpose in mind.